Gehrke, and I'm a native son of Buffalo County. My dad was a dairyman in the town of Molina, and I've shown cattle here at the Buffalo County Fair for a number of years. And I went to UW-Stowe, and I graduated with a degree in industrial ed, and I had a concentration in Broadfield Industrial Arts, which included a lot of drafting, a lot of architectural courses. I entered the Navy for 6 years, traveled to Europe several times, and studied all the things saw the things that I studied in college, actually. And I agreed to do a little presentation on just the basic barn structures, kind of the ethnic origins of the barns. Some of these are common to Buffalo County and the state of Wisconsin. Actually, to start out the presentation, I have a little insect here. Anybody happen to know what it is? Well, it's a cinch bug, and it's probably the primary reason why there are a lot of dairy cattle and dairy barns in western Wisconsin. This insect ended the wheat growing for all practical purposes. The thing has a little proboscis. It chews into the wheat plant and it kills the wheat. And the Yankees didn't abandon wheat growing until probably the late 1890s and the 1900s, when the yields got down to about 13 bushels an acre. So even at any price, wheat growing wasn't profitable. So from the 1880s to the 1900s, they moved on further west into Minnesota and into the Dakotas, continued growing wheat. And they didn't really have any interest in dairy cattle or dairying or the cow. Well, we had all this land to do something with, and the solution to it was the dairy cow. The second-class citizen on a pioneer farm was the cow, but ultimately she became the first-class citizen when they developed a market for butter and cheese and various other things. Another sidelight was the topsoil had all eroded away and gone down the river, so they had to find a way to build up the soil, and again, the dairy cow was a solution to soil fertility and improved crop yields. The dairy cattle, the cow actually wasn't even a dairy cow. It was a crossbred cow of shorthorn extraction, and its primary purpose was to breed another animal to become an ox. Any milk that was collected by the farm wife, converted into cheese and butter and what have you. Ultimately, some of the pioneers in dairying, W.D. Horde and others, came from New York State, Cornell in particular, and came into Wisconsin and Minnesota and advocated dairying. One other sideline is a lot of the land was cut over, went back onto the tax rolls, and they had to find a way to do something productive with cut over forest land. And again, the dairy cow was the secret. There are all kinds of barns. The first barns were probably lean-to shelters with straw over the top, or a log frame with straw over the top. The straw was a byproduct of the wheat production, barley production, oat production. The cattle were just kind of wintered over in a shelter, getting back to summer. Then ultimately a group of carpenters started getting more permanent type structures. And of course the first ones were the log barns, but the very first, or one of the earlier style barns, was called the salt box barn, which is a one-story barn built on the surface of the ground with a lean-to on the shed on the back. About 10 cows or 4 cows and a couple horses could be in the main part, and the hay was stored on the ground in the lean-to. And so this is a salt box barn built entirely on the ground, probably just a rudimentary footing. It had probably 2 rows. One other thing is barns were built to thrash grain in before the era of thrashing machines also. So the bundles were brought inside these buildings, and cattle were run over the top of it to thrash the oats out of the straw. And so they stacked the bundles in a stack, and then when they had time, came back and thrashed it out in the barn. And then they could store grain here. But that's a salt box barn. Actually, as you get toward Eau Claire and into sandy ground where they didn't have a lot of cattle, they didn't build a very big barn. And one other fact is, by hand, only one person could milk about 11 cows. So if you got a bigger barn, 20 cows, 30 cows, you have that many more people to farm. The next generation up were bank barns. I don't know if you can see the drawing I have here. This is a two-story barn with a hay barn on the top, a masonry bottom, with a driveway that goes right into the hay barn. And this was kind of an improvement over the salt box barn in that it was a warmer barn. It was easier to put the hay into the hay barn. Also, this has what's called a gable roof. It's just one flat roof. And almost all of the pole sheds that we have in most of our modern structures would be called gable roofs because it's just one gable. You'll notice the cupola on the top. I happen to have a barn nearly like this. Ours was built in 1902. It was very common. Spring water was used to provide water for the house, for the cattle, to cool any milk or anything of that nature. And usually along a stream there was a bank, so you have a bank-style barn. Okay, the next generation up would be a full two-story barn in which the masonry is on the bottom. You have the hay barn on the top, and this is a gambrel roof where there's a hip that hips out. It's two planes on the roof. These required substantial timbers to build. It took 8x8s and 3x12s and stuff, and purlin plates to build the structure to store the hay. This is about a $2,000 investment. Of course, if you invested $3,000 in cattle, you needed a barn to put them in. Another thing to remember is that they didn't have antibiotics or methods to cure pneumonia, so you had to prevent any illnesses because there wasn't any way to cure your animals if they got sick. So that's one reason why we have these massive stone walls, was to have a very nice temperate environment to work in and to winter your cattle over. A little later invention, this is a kind of newer, I got them kind of out of order here. This is a curved rafter barn. This technology came about probably in World War II with the advent of the Quonset hut. They could make curved rafters using 8-foot boards that were nailed together with a jig that made the rafters. It's a very efficient in material style of building. Okay, now we have another style of barn that we call it. A lot of the horse barns use them. They're common in the West. It's a monitor, which is just has a driveway through the middle with an elevated roof with lean-tos on the side. Sits probably right on the ground with no masonry on the side. Some of these get very, very big. And then there was yet another innovation. I think in the 1890s, around 1900, there were various variations of round barns. 6, 8-sided, 5-sided barns, perfectly round barns. They were very, very efficient in terms of feeding the animals. In cleaning and milking the cows wasn't quite as efficient because we were walking a big circle around. Okay, and then I have a kind of an improvement on the gambrel barn was with the advent of hay lifting forks without having the driveway. They had a hole on the end and a track that came out where they were able to lift the loads of hay up into the barn and dump them. And then Also, you'll notice the milk houses were built onto the barns. Generally, spring water or a tank was used to cool the milk in cans, and then with the advent of bulk tanks, they needed to be closer to the barn, so the milk houses were built on. My dad went on to grade A in 1956, and one of the things he had to change was put the milk house and the bulk tank close to the barn. There were other changes to the wells. Something that we have here in Buffalo County are tobacco sheds. In Gehrke Valley, in Modena, there were 3 or 4 of them. A fellow by the name of Pete Riesland raised tobacco. It was known as Tobacco Pete. You get into Vernon County and in southern Wisconsin, there were huge tobacco acreages, but in order to cure the leaf tobacco, you built a shed, and these lines represent boards on the side that were on hinges, and these hinges were turned out to let the breeze blow through it to dry the tobacco leaves. One of these still stands on one of the Gehrke farms in Gehrke Valley. And then there's yet another style of barn, and this would be a kind of a village barn is what it's called. And there are several of them here in the city of Monrovia. There's enough room to put the buggy, the horse, and a cow, possibly some chickens. And then of course, this device up here is called a dormer, which gave you extra access to the hay mound to store any hay or what have you. This is just kind of a brief overview of barn architecture. There are as many types of barns as there were carpenters and farmers. That's the vast majority of my presentation. I apologize for the flip chart. I'm not real tech savvy to go on PowerPoint or to have, I could do it on overhead. Now, does anybody have any questions? Go ahead.
I was under the impression I read someplace the bar that had on the bank where you drove up, that was a German style?
Well, I'm not of Norwegian origin, and most of these barns were out in the Lookout, Drammen, Eau Claire area, some in the Lima area, which were Austrian, not necessarily Norwegian. But the haying technology and a lot of the dairying has origins in Germany. Actually, this is an English style building, really. It originated in England. The French found out in the 1300s that if you would rotationally graze rather than intensively grazing one field all the time, that you got much more productive pastures, and your hay crops work better if you let it rest. And so some of the personalities behind the improvement in agriculture were W.D. Horde, who was the founder of Horde's Dairymen, advocated dairy cattle. E.F. Gons, I think, one of the pioneers of education in Buffalo County, advocated purebred cattle and beef cattle, and I think he tracked most of the registered cattle too. I thank you. You've been a very wonderful audience. Any other questions?